Welcome. I want to welcome you to tonight's forum for the Jefferson City Ward 5 City Council candidates. I'm Gary Castor, Managing Editor of the Jefferson City News Tribune. I'll be joined with Rebecca Martin, News Tribune City Editor, as co-moderators of this forum. To begin, I'd like for us to stand, though, and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So again, thank you for coming out tonight for this forum. In addition to those we have here in the council chambers, we are live streaming the event on NewsTribune.com, as well as JCTV is airing this live on its station. So we thank you for the partnership with the city and JCTV for this event. Prior to tonight, the candidates were advised the rules of the forum. The forum will include a series of opening statements, general questions for the candidates, and then closing statements by the candidates. None of the questions were shared with the candidates before the forum. Candidates will be given 2 minutes to respond to the questions asked. The order by which they respond will change with each question. Any and all remaining candidates who wish to rebut or answer the same question are given 1 minute to respond. We ask you, the audience, to refrain from expressing your support or opposition to a candidate by applause or making noise, as well as refraining from using a flash photographs. So now let me introduce you to the candidates. To my right is Ashley Jones Kaufman. While serving as the Marketing and Communications Coordinator for the Missouri Department of Economic Development Division of Energy, Ashley Jones Kaufman has been involved with the Jefferson City Public Schools J&C canvassing and boundary line committees. To her right is Jim Crabtree, sitting as the Vice President of Corporate Physical Assets for Central Bank Company. Jim Crabtree has served on various community committees like Old Town Revitalization Company Board of Directors and the city's Environmental Quality Commission. And to his right is John Hensley. John Hensley currently serves as General Counsel at the Missouri State Treasurer's Office and has been involved with community groups like Grace Episcopal Church and the Kiwanis Clubs. For the order of the opening and closing statements, they were determined by drawing lots out in the hallway. Each candidate will be given 1 minute for an opening statement, and we'll begin with Ashley.
Thank you. My name is Ashley Jones Kaufman, and I am a native of Jefferson City. I'm running because City Council is the voice of the people, and how can all people be heard if all people are not represented? I support neighborhood stabilization, historic preservation, community policing, economic development, and maintaining and forming a stronger bond with the historic Lincoln University. Some of my experience has been budget management. Before I worked with the Department of Economic Development Division of Energy, I worked with the Missouri Community Service Commission. It was there I helped assist with a $3 million budget that was allocated to different AmeriCorps programs throughout the state of Missouri. Also in my career, I have formed diverse relationships with different people around the state of Missouri, serving those who are in need around the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. And next we go to Jim.
Thank you. I'm Jim Crabtree, and I have a passion to serve in the community. In the 27 years that I have lived not only in Jefferson City, but also in the 5th Ward, I've served on 6 boards and commissions, half a dozen task force and special projects for the city, and also been very active in First Presbyterian Church, a church that I attend, as I'm president of the corporation there. I have a unique background. I worked 15 years in St. Louis as a consultant in architectural engineering firms, 10 years in public service with the state of Missouri, and 17 years with Central Bank in corporate America. That blend of consultant, public service, and corporate life, I think, offers a good perspective and a healthy perspective for decisions that need to be made. I thank you and look forward to tonight's Forum.
Thank you, Jim. John.
Great, thank you. I'm John Hensley, candidate, obviously, for City Council in Ward 5. My wife and I love raising our family here, and we really value the sense of community that's present here in Jefferson City. I'm running because I want all of the kids in this community, including my own kids, to have all of those opportunities that are necessary to making it easier for them to say yes to staying here, to start their careers and raise their families when the time comes. As an Assistant Attorney General, former Deputy Director of the Division of Workers' Compensation, and current General Counsel to our State Treasurer's Office, I've been entrusted to represent and help lead various statewide agencies and offices, which has provided extensive leadership, legislative involvement, budget involvement experience that I think would be of great value on the City Council. So I hope to have the opportunity to apply this experience and this perspective to help build that stronger future for our entire community. Thank you.
Thank you, John. All right, so let's get started with the questions. We'll start with Jim. The city seemingly has a growing wish list for capital projects and a shrinking budget. What are some of your priority projects in Ward 5 as well as across the city when it comes to capital improvements?
As I've been walking the streets and meeting voters, knocking on doors, I think the resounding desire that the voters have expressed in capital improvement projects is stormwater and roads. In my experience, I headed up the capital improvements for the Department of Natural Resources and have experience managing 85 personnel in that capacity and a budget of over $50 million. So I think that we need to really look at the capital improvement projects, see where we can gain efficiencies and maximize the dollars that are spent. I think stormwater is an important issue. And the city has been spending $350,000 annually, and then gave an additional funding this past year, which is important. But there's 85 different projects in stormwater identified that total $15 million. So that is a big plan that needs to be put into motion, and a long-term plan that needs to be put into motion. But our city infrastructure is aging and is needing help, and there's much less trickle-down funds coming from the state and the federal. So we need to look at efficiencies locally and possibly private-public relationships to maximize dollars.
Thank you. John, same question.
Right. Yeah, the near unanimous answer when you knock on people's doors and they answer and you ask them what they're concerned about is stormwater, and then roads, sidewalks, and guttering. And you know, the City Council had a very effective work session the other night where they prioritized the items on the capital improvement wish list, and the results of that meeting I think are very promising. For stormwater, though, it's there may be hundreds of individual projects, but I think that the only way really to solve our problem regarding stormwater is an entire system replacement. Which my understanding is that's about a $40 to $50 million concern, which is not great at math. That's going to take us a while to reach a few $100,000 at a time. So I think the small utility route is probably the most feasible means of getting there on stormwater. And on roads, there's been plenty of road and sidewalk work done in other parts of town. I know that our neighbors in the 5th Ward are excited for some of that capital improvement sales tax money to be spent on our roads and our sidewalks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Ashley.
Yes, same. Stormwater is important. I know we have an aging infrastructure, and it's something that needs to be addressed. I think, speaking of my street, I suffer from stormwater in my home, but speaking with my city council person, we also had our roads improved on Roland Street, which was nice. So I know the city has a shrinking budget, and other creative avenues will have to be taken in order to supplement for stormwater in people's homes.
All right, thank you.
All right, the next question will start with John. The city is facing a tight upcoming budget year when it comes to funding. What should the city do to address this budget challenge?
Well, let's see. I think the other night was a good example of how to start. It's looking at priorities that have potentially piled up over time and prioritizing them and not quitting until your work is done. And looking at essential services and finding out if there are better, more cost-effective, more efficient ways to achieve those ends. I think those are your two basic tools for pretty much any budget overview: priorities, efficiencies, and better ways of doing things.
All right. Ashley?
Yes, I believe that although you should establish priorities, that should be top. Since it's coming from tax dollars, we should consult the residents in the 5th Ward and the other 9 members on the City Council to see what it is that we should move forward with. I also believe that we can cut costs or save money by partnering with civic organizations or different organizations around town to get the job done and spend less money.
Jim?
Yes, when you have a $32 million budget, it can be overwhelming, but you just have to work on it line by line. Working in a bank, you learn to do that very, very well. 53% of the budget is personnel, so we really need to assess each and every department, whether it's right-sized and whether the pay is fair and equitable. We also need to work together as a whole council and determine the priorities. What are the overriding goals that the city needs to achieve, and how do we best do that? And does the budget exemplify those goals? And then the feedback mechanisms that we get from the voters need to be used to determine that the goals are in line and that the budget is reflecting those goals and objectives.
All right. Next question. You've all referenced stormwater, so we're going to get into the weeds here a little bit with stormwater. Stormwater has been a huge issue in the city for years, causing floods which damage and destroy personal property and damaging city roads. The council's discussed but declined to pursue a ballot issue to confront the issue on a large scale. The council's recently begun channeling money to confront the stormwater issue on a smaller annual scale. How would you, as a council person, go about addressing the city's stormwater issue, and what do you see as obstacles to solving the problem?
I think that stormwater and addressing the problem is a case-by-case issue. For me, in my house, stormwater was because my house did not have certain things that it should have, like a gutter or a system around it. So we had to install that ourselves. But I think, again, it's a case-by-case issue, and once it's looked at and everyone is conferred with the other 9 members and residents, I think they can move forward from there.
Okay. Jim?
Well, we're fortunate to live in a riverine community. We're by the Missouri River, and we have many watersheds that are moving towards that river. Historically, since the city was founded in 1825, development has occurred along the waterways and along the creeks. Those were modes of transportation. As development continued, the pavement exceeded the capacity of the creeks to run, and we have problems with stormwater. With 37 square miles of city, it needs to be managed collectively. Each watershed does have unique characteristics and needs to be studied, and we need to determine what the capacities are and what improvements need to be made in each watershed. With the projections that have been proposed, as I said before, there's 85 identified projects and $15 million in need to handle those. So you are talking a long-term program and a long-term cost to do that. But you got to prioritize the needs. Where are the problems most prevalent, and how can we respond to those problems? There have been numerous proposals that have been done. Other cities have used a use tax where every resident is assessed a small amount of money to pay for the projects. Some states have infrastructure banks that can be drawn from with local and state funding. The Department of Natural Resources has done a study of the watersheds within this community that I think provided a good baseline that needs to be followed. but we do need a long-range plan for funding and for making the improvements.
All right, John?
Yeah, stormwater is an enormous problem that affects people's lives, especially in the Fifth Ward. I've seen probably over a dozen homes in my time visiting our neighbors that are being directly impacted by great additional rainfall flowing through their yards now that didn't happen over the last 20 years that they've owned their home, but suddenly because of potentially because of nearby development, it's their basements are being affected, their backyards are being cut through, their fixtures that they've developed in their yards and on their properties are being directly affected. So I think that rather than sort of piecemeal projecting around town, we're really only going to address this problem in an effective and systemic way by doing an entire system replacement where there's much greater flow volume allowed, where retention basins are used for slow release where possible and where it would be effective, and through the small utility model. To I believe the last part of your question about obstacles that we would face, I would expect that if people view the utility cost applied to their property as a tax, of course no one likes the idea of new taxes. And then my understanding is that when this was explored recently, there would also be a greater cost applied to commercial properties, some of which are owned by nonprofits and churches, not to mention all the state-owned buildings and how we would navigate that issue with the state, attempting to charge them for all the impermeable surface and roofs owned and operated by the state. So those are some of the issues, but I think it's certainly a problem that we have to address for the future of our community.
All right, thank you. I have a follow-up question for all three of you. So if you are elected to the Ward 5 council seat, would you pursue a course of what the city is doing now, which small annualized approach to solving stormwater, or would you put an issue on the ballot, a use tax or some other form to address all of it financially at the same time? Ashley?
I think that first I would sit down and kind of get familiar with my role and see what the other 9 members have to say, and then move further with further research, of course.
Okay. Jim?
I don't think the city could afford to do the whole stormwater issue at one time. So my process and procedure would be to probably proceed as we are for 1 or 2 years while a comprehensive study is done, and then projects can be prioritized. At that time, we can determine the best funding method. People don't want additional taxes on their properties, and I think we can explore some other options than a fixed tax that could fund this project.
Okay. John?
Yeah, my understanding of the issue is that a full solution requires a full replacement, and I know that this was pursued to great lengths a few years ago and then backed off for a number of reasons. But the modest utility expense to each individual residential property, and if we can work on what can be done to accommodate the larger fees that would have been assessed to non-residential properties. And of course, you're going to be working with the other members of the council, and you're going to be working closely with members of the community to make sure that you're representing their interest. From my personal perspective, given my understanding of having studied the situation somewhat, given the choice between piecemeal Band-Aid projects and an actual solution to the entire problem, I think we should give serious consideration to the latter.
All right, thank you.
All right, moving on. Several council candidates from Ward 5, as well as other city wards, have said code enforcement is an issue in the city. Some have alleged there needs to be more consistent code enforcement. Do you see code enforcement as an issue in Ward 5 or in the city in general? And can you cite examples and what should be done to address it? We'll start with Jim.
That's a good question. And working with the Revitalization Corporation, we have dealt with abandoned buildings, and we have tried to restore them one at a time, and that's a very long, slow process. I think there's over 200 abandoned buildings identified in the city, and they do bring down the property values of the buildings adjacent to them. What we have noticed in the areas where we have provided opportunities for redevelopment of an abandoned building is the properties around them improve, and the neighborhood slowly improves. And that's a domino effect that's very, very positive. So your basic question, is it a problem in the city? Yes, it is. If you look at Capitol Avenue, one landowner has 29 properties that are not being maintained, and that's an eyesore. And that's really one of the most beautiful streets within the city that sets the sense of place of a capital city. And I do encourage and promote the revitalization of those properties. It's unfortunate it's gotten to a stage where that it is, in terms of being a court action rather than a cooperative action. But abandoned properties are a problem and need to be addressed.
John?
Yeah, the answer is absolutely. People have, and really it takes two tracks. Half of the complaints that I hear are people who are frustrated about problem properties on their block that they have repeatedly called about, and nothing seems to be done. The other track is small business owners who are trying to operate a business here in our town, and sometimes feel the sense that they, right when they're about to open, they're told you're missing something else that no one previously had told them about. That you failed to comply in this way. Well, I didn't realize I had to comply in that way, and it's causing a lot of frustration among the small business community, and I think that there are things that we can do about it. On the residential side, taking a more direct route to addressing the issue, perhaps not starting with so formalized a process as sending a letter to the registered agent of the landlord who may live in another city, wasting time. Perhaps just picking up the phone and calling the owner directly and saying, hey, there's a couch or a large amount of trash or a mattress in your front yard. Would you mind going and cleaning it up? I personally believe that most people are pretty decent people. I think you'd get a higher rate of response simply going a direct, I would think, somewhat smarter route than immediately doing a formalized process. So that's something to look at. On the business side, I think it's an interesting idea when you have people who are investing a fair amount of money into starting a business in town, perhaps over a certain threshold that could be meted out, to provide for them from the city sort of an application manager, like an account manager, to help shepherd them through the various departments from whom they would need to get approval before they could open business. I think that might get a nice response.
And Ashley?
Yes. Okay. So on the residential side, I do believe that, well, the answer to the question is yes, but we must do the formal process. The paper must be sent, because some of these properties that are decayed, the owners haven't been there in a while, or they may be elderly and they don't have the means to pick up the phone. So it's good that the city is getting letters out there, and that people are aware that this is happening. So it's a paper trail. It holds the city accountable, and it holds the person that owns the resident accountable as well. On the business side, I think that there should be a uniform code enforcement. I know certain people open businesses, and like John said, then they're trying to open, but then they have something else comes up, or maybe they have a different person coming in and telling them that they need something else when they were prepared to open. So yes, code enforcement should be equal along every line, and thank you.
Could I offer clarification?
Sure.
The Old Town Revitalization Committee has contacted landowners on our own by letter, and then also follow up with phone calls, and that has been somewhat productive. For instance, a phone call and after a letter was received resulted in homers on Clark Avenue being redone under our auspices. So, my preference is that we continue to use those softer approaches rather than code enforcement. If the landlord ignores the soft approach, then yes, there are other means.
Can I pile on for 10 more seconds?
Sure.
I don't want to give the impression that I'm for doing away with the entire paper trail. That certainly wasn't certainly my line of work. I'm not a fan of that. I'm just saying my thought is, first instance, see if we can do it informally to avoid long delay, but definitely keep up with the full procedure if you need to take further action.
All right.
Thank you.
Ashley, you want to add anything?
Good.
You're good? All right.
Thank you.
Okay. The next three questions are going to actually be individuals for each one of you, so the other two will not have to answer this question. So, John, you're up first. You've said development of a career development corridor would be a priority for you if you were elected. Explain what a career development corridor is or would look like, and explain why we need one and how the city would benefit.
Thank you so much for asking me this question. And by the way, career development corridor was the phrase that came to mind for me. Certainly that's would be subject to debate and change. What I'm thinking, to address neighborhood stability, better partnership with Lincoln, economic growth, historic preservation matters, I think one way that we can try to address a number of issues at once is by attempting something like this in the area generally between Lincoln University and the old prison site. There are a number of properties that are under the control of the Housing Authority. My idea that I'd love to continue working with people on is identify certain of those properties that potentially are historically significant, with the end goal of making them available to recent graduates, young entrepreneurs, as affordable living and workspaces. It's sort of an old-fashioned idea. Have your business on the main floor and maybe you live upstairs. And, part of my focus in all this, like I said in my opening, is making it easier for young people to say yes to staying here. And if we can make the capital outlay of a location less burdensome on them, if we can allow them to have an affordable space in what I think is an area ripe for economic rejuvenation, where potentially their business or their career could take hold and thrive, I think that might be an attractive thing to these to young people getting out of school. And the number of Lincoln students I've spoken with have said that might be an attractive thing that would help them stay here. And the other important thing would be that the work that would go into refurbishing these properties, which are in disrepair, I think we could invite in students and trainees and technical and trade programs in the area and give those young folks a stake in our future also.
Thank you.
All right. Ashley, this question's for you. You've said that community policing would be a priority for you if elected. How would you define community policing, and how do you think Jefferson City could do it better?
Yes. Okay, so community policing for me it involves the police, but it also involves the community in which we live. We're a small town, but some of our neighborhoods in the 5th Ward, mine included, we don't know all of our neighbors. So community policing to me would be having a meeting or starting a neighborhood watch for neighborhoods that do not have them, and getting the police involved and letting them know that, hey, this is where we live. If you see, if you just look at us and know that we live here, then it'll be a better interaction. I'm not saying people are having bad interactions, but I'm saying just getting to know the community. Also, neighbors knowing neighbors. Like, I go to knock on doors in my neighborhood, and most of them know me, but there's a couple of them that do not, and I think that's something that could change with community policing.
All right, Jim, and this question is for you. You said Adrian's Island is a valuable asset to the city. How would its development benefit the city and promote tourism?
That's a good question, and a question that often brings a lightning strike. As a consultant, I worked on city redevelopment plans for St. Charles, for Little Rock, Arkansas, and for Omaha, Nebraska. And all those cities did not have river access. They were separated from the river through the course of time. Historically, our view of a river is a place that sewage gets dumped into, and we take drinking water from, but very little action. When I was chair of the Lewis and Clark Commission, we were looking at the use of recreational use of the Missouri River, and from St. Charles, up to the northwest corner of Missouri, and there was very, very little use of recreational use of it. When the Katy Trail got developed, the river became a lot more interesting. Missouri Department of Conservation started putting in access points, and recreation has boomed. Going back to those model cities, when river access was developed, it really ignited excitement in the downtown area, and people came to the downtown area, and they came to see the river and to interact with the river. On a much smaller scale, Washington, Missouri has a park along the riverfront, which is used quite a bit. In terms of Jefferson City, with the concept of the bridge that provides access to Adrian's Island, the destination isn't going to be the big calling. It's the journey to the destination. It's going out on that bridge and looking back and seeing the Capitol, standing out along the river and seeing it in all stages, and also being able to see what made Jefferson City: the railroad, the highway, the airport, and the waterways. And I think with 40,000 students visiting the Capitol every year, it'll be a big, big plus.
All right, thank you.
All right, this next question was submitted by our reader, Shelley Swoyer. One of the serious problems facing our city is the lack of safe, decent, and affordable housing. How specifically would you address this issue? I believe we're on Ashley.
John.
John.
I think I started that last round off with the individual question on the career
I think you're right.
I'll take it. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Of course. One of the serious problems facing our city is the lack of safe, decent, and affordable housing. How specifically would you address this issue?
I think at first we should take a look at the housing that's being provided, what's making it not safe, and what needs to be improved. After that, we would come together as a city council. Of course, let me back up, speaking to the residents and asking them how they feel about where they're living, and then coming back as a city council and evaluating what we could do. I know that, again, the budget is tight, so that is, again, where we would call on community leaders and organizations to come in and kind of help, like HUD does the volunteer and helps build houses and things like that. Well, if we have something like that along with community policing, the police would be aware of the neighborhood and maybe make it feel a little bit safer while we figure out a better solution.
Jim?
Well, serving as vice chair of the Housing Authority, I dealt with this firsthand, and there is definitely a need. The public housing is at capacity. Section 8 housing is done on a voucher system, and there's probably a 5-year wait for vouchers. So then Shelley is correct, the need is there. How to address it? As we know, HUD is experiencing budget cuts. Most of the funding for public housing or low-income housing was supplemented federally. There are also programs where private developers come in and do low-income housing or income-specific housing. And I think that that's something that we ought to look at. We have a lot of people who are earning minimum wage or a minimal wage and would like to own or be in good housing. And income-driven housing is an option that should be looked at. A lot of people really shy from Section 8 housing, so this is very different from that and something that I think might be sellable.
John?
Yeah, and I think we need to be realistic that it'll be very, very difficult for us to create better opportunities with simply going through federal and state funded options for this, and we need to be creative at the local level. One, I think, interesting avenue is there are groups in this community, including in the Fifth Ward, that are doing great work uniting families in need with willing landlords, and these private groups are finding suitable homes for families and making it possible for them to sort of step into an affordable living situation with a willing landlord, while also uniting the families with life and career and nutrition training and information. It's sort of a holistic approach that I think we should support, in addition to the sort of traditional things that we continue to work on. And we need to be creative and find solutions for helping the landlords say yes, to make it more feasible for them to participate and make it more possible for these community groups to succeed in their missions.
All right, Jim. Economic development is the engine that drives the city's growth. How do you think the city has performed in this area, and what do you think it should do differently to encourage business growth, both new and existing, in the future?
Very good question. Everybody wants economic development, and everyone sees it as an asset, but it is a complicated process. We have been rather successful in economic growth in terms of bringing new businesses into Jefferson City and new employers. Most of that has been in the manufacturing arena. That's because we've had manufacturing businesses close and displace workers. New ones come in and we capture those workers. So then the question is, how do we move beyond that cycle? How do we attract new business? And it really becomes a labor force issue. As a consultant, for instance, I did a demographic plan for Toyota Gosai in Perryville, and they look at the demographics, and they also look to make sure there's workers there that will fit the need. So if we want to move into the technology arena, which I think would be very smart, most capital cities are very technology oriented. We have Central Technology Services, which is technology oriented. But then we have to see, do we have the workforce that could take that growth or entice someone to come in and into the city with a new business? And then as a part of that, once we identify the areas that we want to grow, or we want to entice certain types of businesses, we need to talk to Lincoln, talk to Lintech, and see if there's programs that are providing those type of workers, those type of trained people that will help entice someone to come in. And then the third part of it is housing. In order to have economic development and bring in new jobs and new people, you need to have homes to put them in. And I am a bit concerned. This spring, there's less than 300 listings, and normally there's 2.5 times that. So we do need to look at housing.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, and I've mentioned already my interest in retaining more of the young talent that's raised and educated here. I think that's an attractive, potentially effective way of having more sort of natural population growth and natural business growth. And a lot of it, I think, is adopting an intentional attitude of partnership and and can do as a model for city leadership when it comes to working with the local people in our community who are attempting to start a business here, and when it comes to attempting to attract business from outside. It's so easy for people, once they're put in a position of authority, to say no because they can. And when you do that too much or for too long, you get the reputation for that. And if it's done too much on a large scale, then the entire region gets a reputation for that. So taking a very intentional approach to being a partner with small business and medium-sized businesses and large corporations that might want to move to town. Making sure that we have an educated, well-trained, trainable workforce is, of course, going to make us more attractive to larger operations. But I think we can do an awful lot at the local level by supporting and inspiring people in our community to take the plunge into business and partnering with them and making it perhaps easier for them to succeed.
All right, thank you. Ashley.
Can you repeat the question for me, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Economic development is the engine that drives the city's growth. How do you think the city has performed in this area, and what do you think it should do differently to encourage business growth, both new and existing, in the future?
Okay, so working with the Department of Economic Development, I did some research on Jefferson City. So in 2017, Jefferson City was ranked 5th best small city to start a business, and that was out of 1,261 cities examined. There were 16 factors: the average growth in number of small businesses, the prevalence of investors, office space, affordability, and corporate tax. I think, saying that, I believe businesses are attracted to our city. Are they all a good fit? I'm not sure. That would better research. But what this does say is that our city is doing something right. In order to continue, I know that the Chamber of Commerce, they have different postings on their boards about jobs or entrepreneurship for college students. Or at me, as a returning Jeffersonian, I left and came back. One of the things that were attractive for me, not just that my family was here, was it's affordable to live here. This is one of the cheapest places I've lived in my college career. And also, in 2016, Jefferson City ranked 13th nationally among the best cities for career opportunities. That's out of 355 metro areas. So we have things that will attract people here. We just have to advertise them and market them better. If you want to reference any of these things, my first fact came from Wallet Hub, and the second one was from Smart Asset. So that I feel we're doing a great job. We could do better promoting, and thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have another reader-submitted question. This one comes from Ed Williams. Do you believe it is ethical for council members to vote to give tax money to an organization such as the Chamber of Commerce when they are a member of the organization? We'll start with John.
Yeah, and I think this gets at a very important broader issue, which is that when you're in a position of authority like the city council, you have to constantly be checking yourself for conflicts. And there are mandatory disclosure requirements, of course, for candidates, as we've all come to learn the last few months, and also for elected officials once they're in office. But when you are in office, you have to constantly be asking if the matters that are coming before you for consideration are things that you should not be voicing an opinion on. To that question, if was the person in the question a member of the chamber or an officer in the chamber? It may be a fact-specific question. If the baseline answer is I would not be comfortable as a city council person voting to benefit an entity which I had. I don't know if general membership is quite enough. It's sort of fact specific, but at least some sort of stake in. You can think of any number of things that people are sort of incidental members of, where it may not ultimately result in a conflict for them. But certainly we need to be on the lookout for times when we would be in danger of inappropriately benefiting things in which we have a stake. and I would certainly be very cautious in any situation like that.
Ashley?
If it was a member on the city council that belonged to that entity, I think that they should recuse themselves from making any decisions in regard, so there are no conflicts and there is no question later. So to answer the question simply, if the organization is affiliated with them, I don't think that money should transfer hands or anything should go on, because it doesn't look good. And overall, it's not always about looks, but it is about integrity. So we want to make sure we're transparent and having a dialogue with folks. But I think overall, no, we should recuse ourselves from giving money to an entity that we have a relationship with.
And Jim?
I'm not an attorney, so I'll do a lifeline to Judge Beadham. Just kidding, just kidding. I think the question is, should the city belong to the chamber, and is there a conflict of interest in funding the chamber as well? And I would just have to say two things. I'd look at precedent and look at the vast number of communities that are members of the Chamber of Commerce and also contribute to the Chamber of Commerce. And that precedence seems to be set solidly throughout Missouri. And then I'd have to rely on our city councilor to make that interpretation, because I'm not an attorney.
All right. Ashley, what's a city issue that you think deserves more attention than it's getting, and why?
A city issue I think deserves more attention is distinguishing historic districts within our city. This is important. It needs more attention because research has shown when you distinguish different areas for historic reasons, property values increase, traffic in those areas increase, and tourism increases. We have a beautiful city. We're more than just a city between Kansas City and St. Louis. We are the capital. So I think making it easier to apply to have distinguished historic districts is something I think that needs to be looked at further.
All right. Jim?
I guess the issue that I think we need to embrace and look at a little bit harder is parking in the downtown area. There's a definite deficit of parking at peak times, and a recent study showed that deficit was almost 600 spaces. And what that means is for businesses like Madison's, Hallmark, any of those, that when there isn't a place to park and you come downtown and you can't find a parking space, you move on and you don't frequent that business. The other part of that's a little bit scary is we're trying to entice people to locate in downtown with businesses or loft apartments, and there's about 40,000 square foot of empty space in the downtown core. There's also approximately 30 empty or potential lofts that could be developed. But again, it's going to be hard to bring those businesses in and bring those residents in if they don't have a place to park. So we are at a point that we need to look at this. I know that the city is looking at the possibility of another parking garage. The current facility is been paid for, and there is funds that being set aside for. But for the success of the downtown core, which is the heart of our city, we really need to pay attention to what's happening with parking.
Okay. John?
Those are two good answers. And in addition to the other issues we mentioned tonight, I think we need to continue our work as it relates to homelessness and poverty. We talked a little bit about affordable housing a little while ago, of course, related to affordable housing and great need for affordable housing at the lower end is poverty, which ultimately results in homelessness or near homelessness. And it's not simply that folks don't have their own place that they can afford to live. The consequences of that trickle all the way through our system. We live next to Morrow Heights Elementary School, and I go there occasionally to volunteer during the day, and the the problem is evident in our community. It's kids who walk past our school past our house twice a day, who, when you see them in school, they're also often not dressed for the weather. They're not eating right at home, and it also happens that they're not reading at grade level. They're not doing math at grade level, and oftentimes they also can create behavioral problems in the classroom, and which of course affects the entire rest of the learning environment. So I think by really continuing to aggressively address those issues, if we can find greater success, perhaps with additional creative routes for addressing those issues, perhaps like the ones I mentioned a couple questions ago, the benefits would be numerous and varied, not just on the housing side, but throughout our community and even in our schools.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. This next question actually starts with Jim and echoes your previous answer. With the extended renovations of the Missouri State Capitol and another parking feasibility study underway, the issue of downtown parking, or the lack of it, has once again surfaced. Do you think downtown Jefferson City has sufficient parking? If not, how would you suggest the city address the issue? Do you have anything to add?
Yes. Well, no, there is not sufficient parking in the downtown area, and that results in missed opportunities for the businesses located downtown. During session, the parking garage is full, and there's a sign up, sorry you can't come in, 4 days a week for many of the weeks while we are in session. So it definitely is a problem. How to address it? I think that we need to look at another parking structure. You can't make land, and there isn't much opportunity for paved parking. You could do it remote and then rely on transit, to trolley people to their work environments. The state tried that, and it really didn't succeed. So my recommendation is we look at public and private partnerships. The land is privately owned, and see what can be developed for expanding the parking in the downtown core.
John?
Yeah, working across the street from the Capitol, as they were putting all these the fences and scaffolding up, you could sense this dread spreading across the entire 65102, I think, over their zip code. As an already tight parking situation is going to be made significantly worse, at least for the next couple of years. Yeah, I mean, looking for additional parking structure space is something that we should be doing. I don't know that we would want to specifically build to respond to this particular parking problem at the Capitol, which may only be around for a couple of years, which I say half in jest. But, promoting more public transportation use. Jim mentioned the remote site parking, and having people come in, from a remote lot by bus. I think that's something to look into. But also starting from their homes or the nearest bus stop to their homes is something else. I know Jim has a little bit of experience with taking the bus to work. Sorry, that was a reference to an interview that some people may not have seen. But so reliance on public transportation to a greater degree, with so much packed into that tight space down there, and of course it's correct that we're not able to make more land where it may not exist already. Options are limited, but public transit, I think, is something we need to lean heavily on.
Yes, okay. I work near downtown, and no, there's not adequate parking. I think it's a good idea to try. I would be remiss to say anything. I work for the Division of Energy, so I would like to promote like carpooling or ride sharing, or even other cities have like a bike checkout deal where, not only are we encouraging our residents to get a little bit of energy and spend some money, but they're getting exercise as well. So trying to find other avenues of or spaces of parking, I could see it being difficult, and I think that further research needs to be done in order to see what else we can do. But alternative ways, diverse ways of getting around downtown is something I support, and to reduce our carbon footprints. That's important, so thank you.
All right, so at this point we're going to begin with our closing statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute to share his or her thoughts, so, and we'll start with John.
Great, thank you, and thanks very much for hosting this forum. It's been really informative and useful. I'd like to take the rest of my time to thank the residents of the 5th Ward, hundreds and hundreds of whom have welcomed me at their doors and welcomed me into their homes for honest discussions of the real challenges that are facing our ward and our city, and for really open explorations of solutions and ideas. And this has occurred in every single corner of our ward, and it's been a true pleasure. This is a really exciting time for Jefferson City. I hope to have the opportunity to apply my experience, my perspective as a person with a career in public service, to helping to build that stronger future for our community. I appreciate your consideration, appreciate everybody who showed up tonight and everyone who's watching online or on TV, and hope everyone comes out on April 3rd to vote. Thank you.
Ashley?
Yes, I would like to close by saying I appreciate people coming to my Facebook page and engaging in dialogue of things that we can do to improve our community. A dialogue and transparency is needed in order to step forward and be inclusive and inviting to people outside of our community. I would like to just encourage everyone to vote on April 3rd, no matter who you vote for. This is your civic duty. This is what we're here for, is to vote. But in light of everything else, I'd like to just say thank you all for inviting me, and I'm respectfully asking for your vote on April 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim?
Well, again, thank you. It's certainly been a journey. I haven't run for office before, and it's a very interesting experience, but the best part of it is meeting the people, and as you knock on doors, and how welcoming they are. I do have a passion for public service and community service, and I'm hoping I can extend that through an elected office. The 5th Ward is a wonderful, wonderful place to live, and I chose to live there. I've had opportunities where I could have moved away and didn't. It's just a great place to be, and I'd like to continue improving the 5th Ward and serving the residents of the 5th Ward, all the residents, with honor and with integrity. I do have experience and that I think would benefit the council. I offer vision, and vision from a design perspective is more listening and then being able to develop a plan from what you're hearing and execute that plan with success. And working for a bank, I have transparency and accountability that I'll bring to this office. So again, I'd appreciate your vote and support. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the News Tribune, I'd like to thank each of you for participating in the forum, and would encourage all voters to come out on this election and vote. We'd also like to thank the readers who submitted questions for the forum. Questions that weren't asked tonight will be asked of the candidates, and their responses will be published in Sunday's News Tribune. We'd also like again to thank JCTV and the city for videoing and streaming this forum. And I would also add, next Tuesday I'll be moderating a council candidate forum for the historic city of Jefferson. It's at 6 o'clock Tuesday, March 20th, in these council chambers. At this point, we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll interview the 4 candidates for Jefferson City School Board. Again, thank you. For school board candidates, let me share with you a few of the things that have happened prior to tonight. The candidates were advised of the rules of the forum. The forum will include a series of opening statements, general questions for all the candidates, and then closing statements. None of the questions were shared with the candidates beforehand. They will be given 2 minutes to respond to the questions asked. The order by which they respond will change with each question. Any and all remaining candidates who wish to rebut or answer the same question are given 1 minute to respond. We ask you, the audience, to refrain from expressing your support or opposition to a candidate by applause or making noise during the forum, as well as refraining from using a flash if taking photographs. Now let me introduce you to the candidates for tonight's forum. To my right is Ken Enlow. He's Director of Human Resources and Business Development at Huber and Associates. Next to him is Pam Murray. She's an incumbent school board member and board member of Community Health Center of Central Missouri. She served 1 term on the school board. Next to Pam is Michael Cootie. He's an incumbent school board member and juvenile court administrator at the Pringer Center. He served 1 term on the school board. And next to Michael is Lindsay Rowden, who is a family care specialist at Freeman Mortuary. So at this point, let me also mention all 4 candidates have had children or grandchildren attend JCPS buildings, and Enlow and Rowden are themselves JC graduates. For the order of the opening and closing statements, it was determined before the forum by drawing lots. Each candidate will be given 1 minute for an opening statement, and we'll begin with Ken.
Good evening. I want to thank you for hosting this. It was kind of a bonus for me because I live in the 5th Ward, so I got to hear the candidates for City Council prior to this, and that was informative, and look forward to, we have some good choices, so that I'm pleased about that. I have been a lifelong resident of Jefferson City, and attended all 12 K through 12 grades in Jefferson City Public Schools, and as you said, I'm a graduate. Both my children graduated from Jefferson City Public Schools, and I now have a grandson. So I have a lifelong connection with Jefferson City Public Schools, and I have a lifelong passion for public education. I've seen that in my own family. My dad served on the school board in the late 70s, early 80s, and my parents were always very passionate about public education, and we grew up with that. So it's kind of a natural thing. As I began to think about considering this, I just took that passion, and I want to communicate that and want to carry that through and merge it with the community service that I've done and bring those together in a position on the board.
Thank you. Pam?
Thank you. I'm Pam Murray, and I was first elected to the school board in 2015 after serving on the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee that was charged with making a 20-year plan for school facilities. I currently chair the policy committee, and since becoming chair, was able to add 2 teachers to participate in that committee. I also serve on the safety and security committee. And during the past 3 years that I've been on the board, student achievement has improved. We have purchased a textbook series for the first time in nearly a decade, and we have a chief of learning. I feel like we're now better poised to continue to improve student achievement than we have been for a long time. And we are also getting more resources to our teachers. Our schools are supported by you, the taxpayer, and April 3rd is your opportunity to have a voice in how schools will operate in the coming years. So thank you.
Michael?
I am Michael Cootie. I've been here in Jefferson City for a little over 40 years. Again, we talk about raising 2 kids. I had a wife who was a teacher, a principal, and now retired. That's why I still work. But I've been around public education all my life. At the current time, I am chair of our Facilities and Safety Committee. I'm on the Budget and Audit Committee. When I ran for school board 3 years ago, one of the things I was running on was wanting to make sure that we had transparency, and that was streaming of our meetings. We have accomplished that, streaming of our meetings. I wanted another area that I was advocating for was for a a second high school. We have a new second high school, Capital City High, along with our new renovated high school, which will be completed within the next 3 years. Thank you.
Lindsay.
Hello, I'm Lindsay Rowden, and I also was raised here in Jefferson City, and I'm a 1998 graduate. I have chosen to raise my 3 kids here in the district. I've got 2 kids that are in Bel Air. I've got a kindergartner, a 4th grader, and then a 7th grader at Thomas Jefferson. I am very proud of the public education that I received here, and we had huge pride in J Pride, Red and Black, from when I grew up here, and I really want that for my own kids. The district is really doing some awesome things right now, and I want to be a part of that momentum. I'm raising my kids with the rest of the families in the district right now, and we're dealing with bullying and increases in depression and anxiety, social media, things like Snapchat and Twitter, things that we haven't had to deal with in the past. I'm raising my kids right now and dealing with those issues, and I think that this is a very important time for me to be a part of the board. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so our first question will go with Pam. What's a local education issue that you think deserves more attention, and why?
I think how we spend our resources is a very, very important item. Our school district has a $100 million budget, and that's even before the $130 million bond issue that was approved and the increased levy for operation of the second high school and additional resources. And I think keeping an eye on the fiscal ball is always important to make sure that our budget always aligns with our educational priorities.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Michael. What's a local education issue that you think deserves more attention, and why?
One of the pillars that we're talking about right now is making sure that we have all kids reading on grade level. That is an area that I think is most important, because if our kids are not reading on grade level when they leave elementary, they start falling behind in our middle school. If they're behind in middle school, they're going to be 2 and 3 grade levels behind when they get to high school, which it's a snowball effect, causes other issues, which will fall into the realm of juvenile court, where I am, if we don't have that achievement. I truly believe that with the early childhood, getting kids prepared for school, getting kids on a reading level, and I think with the process that we're putting in place, working with our summer school program, kids that are below average in reading, getting them in summer school, making that an expectation, I think is an important area that we need to be striving for and working towards.
Thank you. Lindsay?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that's top priority on my list right now to improve the environment is safety and security. I think most of us, that's something that's kind of on our radar right now with all the things that are going on nationally in the news. I want to make sure that both students and teachers feel that they're in the safest place that they can be when they walk into that building. That helps increase improve the educational environment, so to speak. We've done a lot of things to improve, over the course of the last few years with the vestibules and things like that being locked, but I think we need to do a better job. Obviously, there's some misses when you look at what's going on nationally, and I think that is a high priority for me.
All right. Ken?
Well, I would echo the safety security issue is clearly something that's front of mind right now with the recent tragedies. But I think that goes hand in hand with approaching and looking at our students as a whole person. And so we talk about reading levels and being successful in reading, but we also know that our faculty and staff have to deal with a lot of other issues and a lot of things that kids come to school with or without. And so I think, my priority would be for us to approach our educational systems by looking at the child as a whole. And then with that ultimate goal of preparing them and making sure that as they transition from grade to grade and then ultimately from high school to whatever their path, career path is for moving into a career or onto a higher education, that they're prepared to do that successfully. And again, I look at the opportunity I had and felt that I left Jefferson City High School well prepared, and I hope that we can approach each student and each child with a holistic picture of all the things that they need to go on to be successful.
All right, thank you. Before Rebecca gives you your next question, I have a technical issue here. Please make sure that all of your green lights are on your microphones, and you might pull them a little bit closer. Michael and Lindsay specifically, it's a little muffled, and I want everyone to be able to hear you. Okay? Better.
Is that better? Okay. What do you think the district's next priority should be in terms of new buildings? For example, should the immediate focus be on a new elementary school or schools, particularly on the east side of Jefferson City, on a new middle school across the Missouri River, or on 5th and 6th grade buildings that would decrease the number of students at the current middle school buildings and at all of the existing elementary schools? We'll start with Michael.
Thank you for that question. I know during our recent debates in looking at our bond issue for our Capital City High School, also during the review, it was looked at for a East End elementary building. We looked at that and identified, yes, we needed a second high school. Yes, we also need an East End elementary, and I had that in my priorities as I was voting as for establishing what we would need. Yes, I would want to see an East End elementary building built be our next step. Looking at repurposing our existing buildings could be a number of different programs. One of the things that we talked about on how to do that was during our bond issue. As our bonds are paid down, we will have a capacity in order to put it to the voters again at a no cost in order to develop a new building. Once that is taken care of, I think that we were talking about looking at either a middle school within Jeff City or looking at a middle school on in Holt Summit in order to alleviate the pressures within that area. I think it's important that we look at that. But again, my priority would be a new East End elementary, and then from there looking at the other areas that we talked about, either an expansion onto our middle schools or looking at developing a middle school within the Holt Summit area.
Lindsay?
So I tend to operate with a little bit of just common sense, and to me it makes the most sense to explore the ideas about middle school 5th and 6th grade buildings. Not only do we already have the land there for those at both Thomas Jefferson Lewis and Clark, it also first would take care of the overcrowding in the elementary schools. Second would then address the overcrowding that we will be having in the middle schools, and we'll peel some of those kids out. I think that it's definitely a no-brainer on my part.
Ken?
Yeah, I'm not prepared to say that we the number one priority ought to be building an elementary school in the East End. I live in the 5th Ward again in that part of town, and so clearly I think we need to look again at the district-wide needs and look at trends in terms of enrollments now, in terms of the younger grades and what that projects out to be in terms of capacity of our middle schools. We clearly have, I'm very pleased, have addressed the issue at the high school, and so our next step, I think, is as a board and as an administration to look across the district and to see where the greatest need is going to be in terms of overcapacity in the facilities, and then determine the best way to address those issues, whether it be middle schools or additional elementary buildings.
Pam?
Well, I feel that the next elementary school absolutely needs to be on the east side. The district's been buying and selling land on the east side for an elementary school since 1967. There are opportunities for growth on the east end, but it also goes without saying that we need to evaluate where our student population is. Is it at the elementary level? Is it at the middle school level? Currently, both middle schools are over capacity, Thomas Jefferson more so. The Long Range Facility Planning Committee recommended in 2014 putting an elementary school immediately on the east end, adding 10 classrooms to Callaway Hills, and building the second high school. They had in their 5-year recommendation constructing another middle school, perhaps a smaller one in Holt Summit. The Holt Summit area has 15% of our student body approximately. So addressing the middle schools is definitely of concern in the immediate time frame as well, whether it's in Holt Summit or adding on to the existing schools. I would not at this point be in favor of a 5-6 building or buildings. And part of that reasoning is in the boundary line discussions with parents at the various elementary schools, one of the concerns expressed by parents is the number of times their children have to change schools. And each time it is a major adjustment for the children. And certainly when you redistrict, that affects it as well. So right now, a 5-6 building would not be in my top 3.
Can I comment? Can I comment on that?
Actually, we're going to get into the weeds here a little bit on
Okay.
both of them, and you'll have an opportunity then.
Perfect, thank you.
So this topic resonates greatly with our readers. So the next 2 questions will be coming from readers going deeper onto this subject, so that'll give you an opportunity at that point. So we'll start actually with Lindsay with this question. 2 readers, John Landwehr and Jennifer Taub, asked specific questions about East Elementary School. In essence, the school board and administration pledged to build a new East Elementary School as soon as economics allowed the funding without a tax increase when they went before voters to get the second high school approved. Will you honor that commitment to build a new East Elementary School?
Well, because I wasn't a part of that original decision, I think that I would need a little bit more information. From the things that I've read about the volume of kids that are in East Elementary School, it's not one of our more overcrowded schools, from my understanding. So I'm all for building a new elementary school where it's needed, and if that is, if on the east side of town is where it needs to go, I think that that's a great decision. But I would definitely need some more information from either the superintendent or from the Long Range Planning Committee to make that decision.
All right. Ken?
Again, as I stated before, I believe that we have to look at the needs across the district. And so that may in fact be the greatest need. There may in fact be the greatest need there for an elementary school in that vicinity, in that neighborhood, or that location. I don't have the information that tells me today, right now, that that's absolutely the best solution and the best long-term solution for the district to address the needs that we have and facilities. And so I think it's to say, this happened historically without the benefit of looking at where we are today facilities-wise and then projecting to the future is irresponsible to say we're going to make decisions based on something that was done or said 10, 15, 20 years ago and ignore the facts today and look into the future.
Okay. Pam?
Well, I feel that East must be addressed. That can has been kicked down the road again and again. And every time that there is the opportunity to build a school on the east end, the board said, well, we have a greater need here or there or somewhere else, and next time. Well, the next time you have new board members, and it just never gets addressed. So I feel that East does need to be addressed, and if we have needs on the west end also, then we should build 2. Another possible solution is if you build 2 elementary schools, perhaps you could take 6th grade out of the middle schools and alleviate that. That's another possibility, but keeping the kids together further. Does that answer? I forgot, then, was there a second part of the question?
No. Will you honor the commitment to build an East Elementary School?
Yes. Thank you.
Michael?
I was part of that board, and when we were advocating for a second high school, that was something that we talked about. And yes, I would honor that And that's why I would like to see my tenure continued for another 3 years to make sure that we are keeping our word. I think that's one of the things that the community wants to make sure that if we're going to make a commitment, we're going to live up to that commitment. They made a commitment by raising their taxes. I think we as a board need to live up to our commitment and living up to what we said we would do, identifying those issues. We've got the land on the east end. We've had that land for a number of years. It does not make sense that we would not use that and identify that area for our next elementary building. And my answer would be yes, I would honor that.
Thank you.
We have another question submitted by Jennifer Taub. Some believe a new middle school is one of the next larger projects on the horizon for the Jefferson City Public Schools. How do you feel about building another school across the Missouri River on the Callaway County side of the school district? We'll start with Ken.
I'm certainly open to that as a consideration. I obviously, when we look at the growth of the community, there is growth in population there. And so, again, we have to look at where the most practical and most fiscally responsible project would be. And so if that, in fact, is a solution for capacity and overcrowding in some of the schools, then that would certainly be something I would entertain a discussion and a consideration of that location.
Pam?
I would entertain the idea. I think that we would need further numbers on exactly how many students would be taken out of the two current middle schools to serve a new middle school in Holt Summit. And if that would not be practical, then I would consider addressing it on this side of the river.
Okay. Michael?
If you look at Holt Summit right now, Holt Summit feeds Lewis and Clark. So if we were to build a new middle school in Holt Summit, you would really be removing those kids from the Lewis and Clark middle school. So that would free up some space. But I think I would have to agree with the rest of the panel is looking at what those numbers would be. If the numbers would benefit reducing that crowdedness on the Lewis and Clark, that could at times free up the two middle schools and maybe tinker somewhat with the boundaries between Lewis and Clark and Thomas Jefferson, as long as you keep the population equal, you keep the poverty equal, and ethnicity equal between the two schools. And I think that's something that we're always wanting to make sure that we're maintaining, that we don't have the haves and have-nots. And I think that it could be a possibility, but I'm not saying that that's something I would jump at real quick. But by doing it in Holt Summit, you would alleviate the population at Lewis and Clark, because that's where the kids are going.
Lindsay?
Like the rest of them, I think I would entertain the idea. I think today, when you look at the numbers, I think Pam referenced that there's 15% of our students that are there. That means that there's 85% over here. I would need to see the numbers on what would make the most sense. I would be concerned, though, that pulling those kids, those Holt Summit kids, out of Lewis and Clark is just further separating them from the rest of the group for when they go into high school. So I think that there's some benefit to all those kids staying together so that they can harness those relationships as they go into their high school future.
All right. Next question. We'll start with Pam. Michael made reference to the haves and have-nots school system, and that's what this question is going to be about. As part of the campaign to pass the 2017 bond issue for the two high schools plan, the district assured the public that we would not have a, quote, haves and have-not school system. In essence, the two high schools and the middle and elementary schools feeding the two high schools would be balanced and equal. Are you committed to changing the boundaries of the schools to maintain that balance? And what percentage of difference and in what areas, such as poverty, test scores, etc., would trigger that shift in boundaries?
Well, right now, what is being looked at is having that equity have and have not for the high schools. Our middle schools are pretty equal. However, we have wide disparity in our elementary schools. We have a vast difference, as much as 35% difference on the poverty rate as measured by free and reduced price lunches between some of our schools. It might even be 40%, I think, if you look at the absolute worst and the absolute best. We also have disparity in our test scores. And right now, we are not looking at changing boundaries on the elementary level to correct that. That would be a massive redistricting to look at that. But those haves and have-nots also go into issues of diversity that the district has faced. It goes into whether or not there should be another school on the East End. All these things gather together. And as our boundary line committee is currently looking at the lines, tinkering with some of the elementary school lines in order to have equal high school lines, that committee is currently not looking at racial or ethnic numbers. They are looking solely at poverty. They are not also looking at attendance. So there are so many factors, and I think that if we take them all into account, there'll be a massive redistricting.
Okay, but let me circle back. I want to be as specific as possible with this. What percentage of difference for poverty should there be between districts that would qualify as equal? Okay, so that's part of the question. 5, 10%, pick a number. The other aspect of it is what elements, poverty, attendance, grade, or test scores, what should be the determining factors of what constitutes equal? If we're going to pursue this goal, okay?
I think the demographer has recommended that you should have a 10% or less imbalance in free and reduced. And I agree that would be an upper limit. It becomes a little more difficult. One of the things that came up in the diversity meetings that the community held last fall was that our community has separated into pockets. We have pockets of poverty. We have pockets regarding race, although that is not as much as it was. We also have national origin pockets. It's hard to have both neighborhood schools and equity that is complete, but I think a 10% guideline is what we should strive for, no more than a 10% difference on those factors. And I think that applies also with the test scores. We have got to address those, whether by continuing our current literacy efforts and realigning our curriculum. Those are all things we're doing, but we have got to get better at it so that all our schools are performing at a good level and our students are either proficient or advanced.
Okay, thank you. Michael, same question.
If we look at what is being identified right now as being equal, we are at about 3% between Thomas Jefferson and Lewis and Clark when it comes to poverty. We're right at a 3% difference. For population, we're about 59 between Lewis and Clark and TJ, the way it is right now. I would never go above 5%. Because once you start creeping the 10, you're at 12, you're at 13. I think we do not need to go above a 5% in order to have the equity. If we were to add in other factors, I think that we would have to step back and would take a little bit longer in looking at where we go if we're going to take in the test scores as being equal in all areas. Because if you look at our poverty, East Elementary is the highest when it comes to poverty, and then the second largest is Callaway Hills. The lowest is North. So you're going from north to you look at Holt Summit, they go from one of the second highest to the lowest, and then you come into Jeff City, and we have 9 other buildings in the district that we have to look at, from Pioneer Trails is outside the city and the county, and looking at that. If we look at the 2 middle schools, and that's what we've been looking at in order to be the feeder into the capital city and to the Jefferson City, it's pretty equal right now, and based upon those limited factors that we have. If we're going to increase those factors, it's going to take us a little bit longer, and we may not at times get that equity. But I think what we're using as factors right now is pretty good, but we can improve.
And just to be specific, those factors are poverty.
Population. If you look at ethnicity between Lewis and Clark and Thomas Jefferson, we're pretty doggone equal when it comes to the population as it stands right now.
All right. Lindsay.
So I would have to agree with Michael. I think somewhere at or under the 5% mark is a smart place to try to fall. That's a good goal. I think that if you creep up any higher than that, you allow yourself to slip a little bit. I think that poverty and free and reduced lunch are a really good place to start. This is a big project that the district should have looked at a really long time ago. It's something that I think that we should be looking at and evaluating every 3 to 5 years. I'm not sure what that magic number is, but I'm sure that the demographers probably have a good recommendation. But I think that if you're addressing both poverty and free and reduced lunch, there are also some numbers that coincide with that. The lower test scores, the lower reading scores. So I think that that's a really great place to start, and it'll help it pick everything up to grow together.
Okay, thank you. Ken.
So I would echo what you've also heard. My goal would be the 5% range, that we try to, our goal and our target would be to keep those disparities at that range. It's my understanding from looking at the historical numbers, the middle schools have actually shifted back and forth a little bit over the last few years in the free and reduced lunch, but they have stayed within that 5% range in terms of difference. Those are the 2 facilities, and that's the way they're looking at now, and what has always been discussed when we're talking about feeding the high schools is to ensure that, again, that any redistricting, any redrawing of the lines would not dramatically change those numbers in terms of the free and reduced. How much the district has looked at the other factors, the test scores, the population in terms of the minority populations and so forth. I've seen some of those numbers recently, but I don't know how historically we've measured those. And I think that has to be taken into consideration with the fact that, again, you have 11 elementary buildings, and you don't want to start taking people away from their neighborhoods to simply balance an elementary school in all of the measurements that you might be able to use. So we've seen that discussion. People get very emotional when you start talking about that discussion that we've been having regards to redrawing some lines for the 2 high schools. And so those are all very, people get very passionate about that, and rightfully so. No one wants their child to be driven past a school to be taken across town simply to get a number correct on a statistician's report.
Right. But just to be clear, that I'm following you, the factors that you're referring to, your instinct right now, if you were a school board member, would be poverty and...
I would want to look at all of the numbers. Again, the poverty level seems to correlate with some of the other factors, but I have not seen the demographers' reports to see what those other components, how those other components play in. I'm comfortable with the fact that we have been able to maintain that around 5% range in terms of difference between the 2 middle schools, and that's the goal for the 2 high schools.
Okay.
All right, we have another reader-submitted question. This one comes from Cheryl Hibbett. District statistics show disparities between racial and ethnic groups in achievement test scores and in the severity of disciplinary consequences for the same behaviors. What will you do to address these disparities? Michael.
That's an area that comes close to heart for me because I'm at the end result of some of those discipline issues because I end up with them at juvenile court. I always said at the very beginning, when you have zero tolerance, you're going to have unintended consequences. You got to be able to look at those issues on a case-by-case basis. Yes, we've got to address discipline. That is, I'm not saying you be soft, but you look at it on a case-by-case. If a kid walks up and it hits another kid behind on the head and the kid comes back to defend himself, you don't kick them both out for 10 days. You look at the aggressor, the perpetrator. You don't kick them both out. And that is an area I truly believe that we've got to have to look at. At the same time, when you look at the issues around discipline, I think it goes hand in hand with our personnel. Better training, better communication with our staff on an ongoing basis. I've been a big proponent when we talk about where our administration, our building administrators, and our teaching administration should be reflective of the population in which it serves. That is an ongoing thing that I have advocated on an ongoing basis. And I think as we get closer to that balance, it will take care of some issues. Maybe not all issues, but it can have an appreciable effect on some issues. If you look at our elementary buildings, we have, I would say, easily 95% female. We have no male elementary teachers. When I talk about being reflective of the population, folks, I'm looking at it from ethnicity and gender. So I don't want folks to take me out of context, and we've got to look at it from that perspective. We need to have role models in our elementary schools for our kids, too, as we move on up the line.
Lindsay?
Sure. So I couldn't agree with Michael more on addressing situations case by case. Right now I think that we try to look at behavioral issues as black and white, and we try to get those kids to fit in that box. And that's a really tough job. I mean, there's lots of gray in there, and you've got purple and pink, and not everybody is going to fit in that same criteria. I'll use the BIST example for the behavioral program that we're currently using in the middle schools. Some kids just aren't BISTable, and they don't fit in that box. And I think that my 7th grader, my 13-year-old, is absolutely a perfect example of the challenges that we've come up against with that behavioral model this year. So I really think that we need to be flexible enough to address those things on a case-by-case basis. My household doesn't operate the same as Michael's, and it might not operate the same as yours, and kids are all up against different challenges, and that's affecting their behavior, and you never know what's going on at someone's home. So I think that flexibility is really important. The other thing is open communication between students, their teachers, and their families. Letting parents know this at the very second that you've got an issue is really, really important. I know that it's hard. Teachers and administrators get busy throughout the day, but it's hard to address something as a parent when you find out about it 2 or 3 days later. So open communication and quick communication, I think, needs to be a priority there.
Ken?
Would you repeat the question?
Sure.
Because I'm not sure, I want to make sure I agree with the assumption or the statement that the submission was
Fair
made.
enough. District statistics show disparities between racial and ethnic groups in achievement test scores and in the severity of disciplinary consequences for the same behaviors. What will you do to address these disparities?
So I have been attending board meetings since last summer when I first considered running for the board, and I have heard many reports and seen some specific initiatives that the administration has been taking to help address some of these issues. So I believe that that conclusion may be based on some historical, I don't know if it's still based on what's happening today, but obviously any disparity between the way a behavioral problem is handled, if it's based on any difference at all, then that's an issue. And so, again, when we look at the children and the students, as I referenced early on, as a holistic approach, I think that we're able to, again, take into consideration. I heard on the news today Stephen Hawking, the incredibly profound scientist. It was said that when he was in elementary school and even high school, he was not a very good student. It's interesting to hear that and then to see someone who went on to be recognized as a brilliant scientific mind. And so we obviously have to deal with each student where they are, and so any disparities in terms of how students are dealt with based on whether it's test scores, behavioral issues, or whatever, those have to be consistent across the board in terms of how they're handled. And I would agree with Lindsay that everybody needs to be involved in that discussion. Everybody needs to have a stake in that: parents, the teachers, administrators, and everyone.
Pam?
Currently, the district is reviewing data and looking at it more closely and trying to focus in on data that's subjective versus objective to better define where we stand. We have also, in the past 2 years, added a number of behavioral interventionists and other mental health supports. Those are positives. One of the things that we could change is currently when a student is given an out-of-school suspension, they are entitled to a hearing, but that hearing is not scheduled until the last day of the out-of-school suspension, which essentially means if that decision is overturned, they have already lost possibly more than 10% of their school year. So that is something that could be changed. I think that when dealing with students, really dealing with any issue, it's important not to overreact or underreact. Last time we ran in 2015, we got a lot of questions about restorative justice, and there is a lot to that because just a punishment is not a learning experience. But if you engage students in a restorative justice where they must come to terms and learn the consequences of their actions and try to remediate any harm that they have done, that can be a tremendous learning experience and possibly change the outcome for that student. Recently, I went with some community members to visit a school district in the St. Louis area that was having problems with achievement. And we spent several hours there looking at their high school and their alternative school, which also served middle school. And there were a lot of lessons learned, more than I can use in my remaining few seconds. But there are a lot of things that other organizations are doing, other school districts are doing, that we could at least look at and bounce around our faculty, our parents, and our mental health experts to see if they might help.
Thank you. Our next question comes from reader Patsy Johnson. To the incumbents, we'll start with Lindsay. To the incumbents, what contributions have you made as a board member, and what are the benefits of electing you to serve another term? To the challengers, what motivated you to challenge the current board members running for re-election, and what expertise or assets would you bring to the board which current members may lack?
Sure. Well, once again, I'm running as a parent. I'm running as a parent with kids in the district today. And so I think that definitely sets me apart from the rest of the panel. I'm dealing with new challenges and challenges that weren't around when they raised their kids. And I think that brings a unique perspective. I'm active in my kids' buildings. I see things that are going on. I have awesome relationships with teachers and administrators. So I think that just really brings a unique perspective for me because I am going through the challenges today.
Thank you. Ken?
Sure. I obviously think there are some differences between us as individual candidates, and I believe that first of all, the reason I considered running, again, was just a love for this community and the importance of our schools and the health and well-being of our community. I think there's clearly, we heard it referenced with the City Council talking about the importance of education and the whole, quality of life that we have here, and I believe that with all my heart. I've been involved as a volunteer and associated with our public schools for a number of years. From a business perspective, as a business partner, have worked as a volunteer for a number of different aspects of the schools, and been glad to have the opportunity to represent our business community, and again, working together and building bridges between our schools and our business community, which I think is vitally important. I bring almost 30 years of management leadership experience, organizational experience, 13 years in public sector with the State of Missouri Department of Education, and then for the last 20 years as in the private sector, and seeing both sides of that from our business, both public and private, and then organizational leadership. I believe those are unique qualifications and unique experiences that prepare me for helping to lead this organization.
Okay, thank you. Pam?
I have 2 grandchildren in the school system now. One is in 7th grade and one is a senior. And I have been truly blessed to have had the opportunity to participate in their education and to visit their schools and their classrooms over the years, over their entire career in our public schools. And it's just been a really positive experience for them, their parents, and for me as well. Some of the things that I have contributed since being on the board have been increasing transparency and accountability. As I've been on the policy committee for 3 years, and increasing teacher participation, actually getting teacher participation at the committee level has been, I think, a major accomplishment. It's very important to listen to our teachers and to our students, because they are the ones who are actively engaged in education. I have also, as a board member, been able to participate in terms of advisory and approval on changes in our administration that have led to a structure that is more focused on student learning and student achievement. And we are poised, I think, to do very, very good things. The other thing that I have done every single month since I've been on the board is to get out and meet with community groups and individuals within the community to have a dialogue about what's important to the community, the taxpayers, parents, and former educators and current educators as well. And this dialogue has been truly good. And through my website, pammurray.org, I have also been able to communicate and get information from community members as well, so to keep people informed about what the district is doing from my perspective.
Thank you. Michael?
Okay. There are a number of areas I'm proud of as being a board member. Number one, when it comes to transparency, and that was streaming of our meetings. Took 2.5 years, but we got it. Also being part of the board, we unfortunately last fall we had an issue with some of our students, and not just Jeff City students, with the picture. And we had a number of church meetings when it came to diversity. The school system came together and had several meetings of community groups, and I wanted to make sure that we had a meaningful start, where it's just training is not an end all, but it's a beginning. It's a conversation. It's a training where we start trying to understand the issues and the problems. So I went out and wrote a grant. We have a grant where we're bringing the administration, the school board, our principals, along with JCPD, along with our Parks and Recs and our juvenile court. We had our first meeting on March 7th. We're going to be meeting again in July, and then again in mid-August. That is something that we've got to start doing and looking at as a community, as a district. It's not an end all, but it's a beginning. We have to look at what is it that the issues that we have out here. Another area that I saw that was a real deficit, and it was kids that are struggling with reading and math. If you're wanting to have a tutor with a child, they're going to have to be after school. But if you're wanting to have them have a tutor after school, the school bus leaves, so they're not going to be able to get home. So wrote another grant, so we can do up to 20-some-odd kids a semester. So I'm working with retired teachers, current teachers, and Lincoln University students in math and reading, and so they do the tutoring at 3 o'clock, at 4:15. We'll have a cap. They're picking up, taking them home. So it's just to make sure that we have the resources in order to work with their kids. That's just some of the things that I've been working on.
All right, thank you. We're going to do one more question. I'm going to ask each of you to limit your answer to 1 minute. I just love squeezing one more question out of you guys, all right? So bear with me there. So I'm going to blame Rebecca on this. She's got the last question here, but let's limit to a minute, and then we'll have closing statements.
Okay.
All right. How do you define transparency? And what is your feeling about providing information to the public annually concerning the salaries of all district-wide administrative staff? And we'll start with Ken.
How do I define transparency? I think clearly as a taxpayer, I am interested in knowing how our resources are used. And so I guess I would reject the idea that I think some of the discussion about transparency implies, and that is that there's something clandestine or there's something behind the scenes that's going on that is trying to be kept from the public. That's not been my experience in terms of getting information that I've sought, and as I have attended board meetings. Again, as a taxpayer, I think everyone who pays taxes has the right and the privilege to know how our resources are being used by the district, and that goes for all salaries across the entire staff and faculty.
Right. And I apologize. I should have said this was another reader-submitted question. This came from Lonnie Schneider. Pam?
Well, thank you for that question. This is Sunshine Week, as designated by the National Press Association, and it's a week dedicated to raising the awareness about the public's right to know about how government that is supported by taxpayers, how that government operates, how decisions are made, and who makes them. So as a public official, I am just a gatekeeper. I am just a caretaker. And all that information, with rare exception of student records and teacher or staff disciplinary information, almost all that information and all the money is a public record and it should be and legally is available, and I support that completely.
Michael?
Okay. Well, when I think about the word transparency, I look at it in two ways: financially responsible, and then when we go out and make commitments that we're also following through and not just letting it fall off the radar. As everyone said, we as a board, we have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the dollars that are appropriated to the school district are spent appropriately. And as a board member, I believe that we do that, and I will never not do that responsibility. I think at the same time, if we're going to go out and advocate for raising taxes, and we identify we're going to do one thing now and then come back and do something at a later date in order to get that support, I think we need to follow through and do that. Yes, there are some boards have committed others from one period to another, but that's the fact of life.
Lindsay?
So when I think about transparency, I think about being open, honest, responsible, being available to have conversations with people who have questions. Those are all things that I think about when I think of transparency. I think the board has done a good job in improving transparency. I think we have continued work to do, just like anything. I think having an open door and being available to talk to teachers, administrators, staff, and students at any time, I think is another big piece of the puzzle, and helps build those strong relationships, which in turn increases the transparency. when you talk about salaries, specifically for administration or the administrative offices, I'm all about fair and equitable salaries. I think we do a good job. Like they've said, that those are public documents. I'm not necessarily sure I agree with publishing them yearly. I think if people want that information, it's there for them to come and get.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So now we're going to do our closing statements. And I will try not to cough in the middle of your closing statements here. Pardon me. So we're going to start with Pam. You have 1 minute.
Well, first I'd like to thank the News Tribune for sponsoring this and thank the City of Jefferson for allowing use of the facilities. I feel I want to continue on the transparency theme because they were prime themes when I ran in 2015. I think transparency has improved. My personal website has been my way of trying to be accountable to the voters and the entire community. As a board member and as a community member, I feel it's very important to put students and teachers first, and all my talk about budget is purely to make sure that we have the resources available to support that and all the goals that we have as a district. Lastly, I'd like to thank everyone who turned out tonight in person or electronically, and I certainly hope that you will vote on April 3rd, and I respectfully ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael?
Again, I'd like to thank the News Tribune for putting this together. I'd like to thank everyone who's come out here tonight to see the 4 candidates. I was elected 3 years ago. I wanted to see transparency. I wanted to see us come together as a community to see a second high school built. We've got a second high school built. We got streaming of our meetings at the board meetings, because if you look at the folks that are here right now, you could not fit into our school board meeting with the number of folks we have here right now. And so with the streaming, that has helped out. Again, I truly believe that we've come a long ways. We also, within this last year, after 10 years, we have bought a new curriculum, books. We had not bought new textbooks in 10 years, folks. We have done that over the last 3 years. So I think this is something that I would like to see maintained and ongoing as we develop our curriculum, and I'd like to be part of that. And again, I would like to ask you for your vote.
Thank you. Lindsay?
Well, I'll echo that and thank you guys for the opportunity to be here tonight. I haven't ran for anything since student council in high school, so this has been an interesting journey. I really just appreciate all the support that I've been given from the community, from my littlest supporters that joined us from their gymnastics class back here, to businesses that have been supported. I've heard from teachers, administrators, even some students that have echoed their support, and I just couldn't be more thankful. I am a JC mom running for JC schools, and I think that I'm the perfect candidate to fill one of these positions. So I encourage you guys all to vote and would appreciate your support on the 3rd.
Thank you. Ken?
I echo the thanks for the forum and for the opportunity for us to share our perspectives and our passion. I've said from the very beginning that I wanted to focus on positive leadership. I believe organizations function most effectively when the leadership is positive, and that means being honest and open and dealing with issues from a collaborative and a cooperative kind of spirit. I want to continue the emphasis on achievement and excellence. We have a rich history, and I think we need to build on that. I want us to continue investing in the future. I led from the very beginning, was very upfront and very involved in knocking on doors and putting up signs and talking with community groups and individuals about the J+C bond issue. And I said I thought it was a turning point for our community, and I'm so pleased that we did make that decision. And so I want to build on that, and I want to continue to be engaged in the community. I've been involved in the community as a business person, again, in the public-private sector, and I want to continue to build those bridges and to reach out and be an ambassador for our schools in the community.
Thank you. On behalf of the News Tribune, I want to thank you for coming and participating in this forum. And I would encourage all voters to get out on April 3rd and help select the next board members for the school board. We'd also like to thank the readers who submitted questions for the forum. There were a few that we didn't get to, so we'll be reaching out to the candidates and asking them to respond, and their answers will be published in Sunday's News Tribune. So again, I thank you for coming. I thank JCTV and the city for helping us stream this and get it on TV, and I thank the crowd for being here tonight. Have a good evening.
Thank you.